7,000 miles, 22 states in 15 days. Come along. Heading north on I-75, we were en route to our first stop, which was Mount Rushmore. From there, we would go across to Yellowstone, down to Vegas, through Grand Canyon, and back home to Florida. Each day we would get up early and we would drive as late as possible. Not knowing how soon or how late we would get tired, we opted to not make reservations so we could drive as far each day as possible. So we utilized Cracker Barrels as our evening stays, and this also allowed us to have a nice breakfast each morning as well before we headed out. Getting into South Dakota, into the Black Hills, we started taking a lot more photos. This is where, in our minds, our vacation really started. With all the big stone structures and the winding roads, it was just absolutely breathtaking. On our way to our first campsite for the first 3 days, we stumbled through a little town on the way, and there was a beautiful rock tunnel that we drove through, and we decided that once we got to the campground we were going to go back and investigate that little town. There was a lot of neat little shops and things to see. Here's our exit that'll take us to our resort. After making the turnoff, we came upon this bridge, and I never expected to see such a beautiful bridge, as large as it was, made of wood. After a few more miles, we arrived at the Mount Rushmore Resort and Lodge. Absolutely top-notch. They had a restaurant, a beautiful visitor center with a gift shop. They had horses you could rent and ride there. They had an ice cream shop. They had all kinds of souvenir shops. There was a lot to do here with rental bikes, rental carts, swimming pool, putt-putt. I mean, you name it, they had it. And their campgrounds were very nice. They were good sized, very nice lush grass. They were gravel sites, but they were fairly level. Didn't take a lot of leveling blocks to make the coach comfortable. They had cabins for rent, which is a great thing to do if you're going to take folks with you. If you maybe have some in-laws or that don't have a camper themselves, but you'd like to take them on a trip, you can go to these KOAs, and a lot of them have cabins so that you can convene at the camper the next day, but you each have your own space in the evenings. So it's a great idea if you have family members that do not have an RV. Now that we've settled into our campsite and disconnected the truck, we're off to the Mount Rushmore National Memorial. I have to say, I've seen it in pictures, but I've never seen it in person, and it is very impressive, I have to say. After taking in Mount Rushmore, we decided to head down the road back to that town that we drove through, that we wanted to explore. The scenery is absolutely spectacular. But even so, you still, safety first, you need to keep your eyes on the road. Finding a parking space, we started exploring that little town, and lots of neat little things there to see. There was some artisans that would carve with chainsaws, that absolutely incredible work. They had Sasquatch, and they had eagles, and a huge chair that they made. It's incredible. You could spend half the day just looking at what they made just with carving with chainsaws. Really, really neat place. Not far away, there's also a steam train that you can also ride. The next day, we opted to do the Black Hills ATV rides, and so family-owned business, really neat place. We rented a couple of them, one for my wife, one for myself, and they gave us a map and showed us where we could ride, where we couldn't, and you actually ride down the roads to get to these lands, and we were back in the most secluded areas, taking trails that we felt like we were the only people on the planet. It was an experience that I'll never forget. The next morning we headed out across Montana to the corner of Idaho to drop down to the west entrance of Yellowstone National Park, where we would stay at a KOA that was just outside that west gate. As we rode our steel horse and modern-day covered wagon down the concrete trail, we really could picture all of the covered wagons and the cowboys of days gone by crossing these vast prairies. We originally had wanted to stop at the Badlands on the way. However, with time constraints and trying to get to our campground on the west side of Yellowstone, we just simply didn't have enough time. But fortunately, we did have enough time to stop at a prairie dog farm, which was just outside the entrance to the Badlands. And my wife made quite a few little furry friends, and she absolutely loved them. Back on the road again, just a few hours later, the Rocky Mountains appeared on the horizon. The scenery in the windshield was absolutely non-stop. As we drove through Big Sky to get to West Yellowstone, there were rivers rushing with big rapids right beside the road. It just beautiful. We arrived at the northwest corner of Yellowstone Park, and we stopped to get a picture of the sign. Even though we weren't really going to be visiting Yellowstone until the next day, we stopped here just to get a picture of the sign before we continued on to West Yellowstone, the little town outside the west entrance. During our 2-day stay at this particular KOA, we did stop at the West Yellowstone town, and we ate at a very nice steakhouse. They're excellent food, and we did take in a movie at the Skyview Cineplex. It was late afternoon and mostly cloudy as we rolled into the Yellowstone Park West Gate KOA. And beautiful visitor center. We signed in. They gave us a really nice site, full hookups, beautiful creek behind the property that we could hear from our camper, mountains in the view. I mean, it was just beautiful there. Very well maintained, clean. Couldn't ask for a nicer campground. The next morning we were up bright and early to be at the gate when they opened under clear skies. We were greeted by bison shortly after entering the park, and the rest of the day it was just non-stop scenery and wildlife. I highly recommend this to anybody to put on their bucket list. We filmed all this from the safety of our vehicle, respecting both the animals' space and their power. I wish we could say that everyone did that. However, while we were there, we did witness 3 different people at 3 different places not following the rules. Driving deeper into the park, we came upon areas where steam was literally just coming up through the ground, hinting at the amount of power and heat that is just under the surface. Even some places where the asphalt was even somewhat melted, you could see water boiling in some places. Very beautiful, but at the same time extremely dangerous. These people that have kids and the kids go running around, there's places where the ground is not very thick at all, and you can actually be in up to your ankle, knee, or even your waist in boiling water if you don't stay on the trails. Driving on further, we came upon the visitor center, and we were surprised by a group of elk that had made their way to the visitor center. It's a little on the unusual side, and it was quite a pleasant surprise. The landscape can change in a moment's notice, from these sulfur fields that look like another planet, to lush grass and trees, to waterfalls, to very, very rocky areas. This area is called Swan Lake Flat. This is in the higher elevations of the park. As you can see, there's not nearly as many tall trees in this area. A lot of meadows, a lot of open space, and again, another type of landscape here at Yellowstone Park. Now we're coming back down into the lower elevations where the lakes and the trees are, and we're headed toward Yellowstone Falls. Stopping at the Yellowstone Falls lookout, you can see that we took these pictures from behind the guardrail, but it's pretty close to the edge, and you can see that gravel. You would just slide down a few hundred feet and then off the end of the cliff at the bottom there into the gorge. While driving around Yellowstone, be prepared for frequent stops. It's one lane each way, and there's a lot of wildlife, so traffic does back up a little bit here and there, but the rangers do a great job of keeping traffic moving. While there are a lot of volcanic features everywhere in the park, there's also a lot of big lakes. Yellowstone Lake is a beautiful backdrop. And then there's another area where the fire of 1988 took out thousands of acres of trees, and that area is starting to come back, and you can see some small pine trees starting to grow back up in that area. Now we're getting close to the Old Faithful Geyser Visitor Center. This is one of the busiest areas in Yellowstone Park, is the Old Faithful Visitor Center. So it may take a few times through the parking lot to find a place to park, but it's well worth the effort. We got back in the truck and headed down the road, and we were headed back towards the west gate to exit the park to go to our campsite. And on the way there, we just could not stop talking about everything that we saw and the experiences we had, and how Yellowstone National Park literally exceeded our expectations in every way. The next morning we got up and hit the road early to head to the Rockin Ranch. If you ever make it out this way toward Alpine, Wyoming, you want to stop by the Rockin Ranch. They have cabins for rent, they do horseback riding, and they have different trails for all different experience levels. They have fly fishing guides. It is just a really nice place, and they do have a fair amount of parking, so we were actually able to stop by there even though we had our trailer with us. Join us for part 2 of our trip as we go on to Minnetonka Cave, Las Vegas, and the Grand Canyon.